Yes, a very good morning to you. It's Wednesday, the 14th of October, 2020. My name's Pete Fairbairn and welcome back to the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff, where we bring you 5 of the biggest stories making waves in the world of sport. We get up early, we scour the newspapers and we read all the yarns to decide what we're going to talk about. And then, of course, I'm lucky enough, as always, to be joined by one of Australia's preeminent sports media talents who's able to dissect and analyse and bring some additional insights to those stories. And today, one of the very best, Natalie Yoannidis down in Melbourne. How are you, Nat?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Pete. How are you?
Doing very, very well. Always great to have you on the show. And we've got plenty to talk about because it is an exceptionally busy time of the year from a sporting perspective. We're going to start in the AFL. Story from Michael Gleeson in The Age. And he's been speaking with Geelong Football Club President Colin Carter. And Colin Carter, very proud of his football club and their ability to rebuild on the run over the course of the past decade since their last premiership in 2011. They'll head into their 5th preliminary final since that flag when they take on the Brisbane Lions this week at the Gabba. And there's a lot of criticism, I guess, that comes Chris Scott's way. He's got that 70% winning record overall at Geelong, which is fantastic, but hasn't been able to break through for a second grand final appearance, let alone a second premiership since 2011. But Colin Carter coming out and saying to Michael Gleeson just how proud he is of the club, the players and the coaches for yet again being back in a preliminary final. Carter says that people talk about 10 prelims in 14 years, but we've had one top 10 pick since 2007. I think the team have done a miraculous job. We're in the mix again, and I'm just so proud of them. Of course, only 4 players remain on the list from the 2011 premiership side, being Joel Selwood, Harry Taylor, Tom Hawkins, Mitch Duncan, and then, of course, Gary Ablett, who was at the Suns in 2011, but played in Geelong's 2 premierships prior to that. In general, Nat, do you think the football industry is too harsh on Geelong and doesn't recognise how consistent and how successful they have been over the past decade? Should we be applauding their rebuild on the run as opposed to ruining their lack of premierships under Chris Scott?
I think it's actually a really good point that you make. We do talk a lot about how Geelong haven't been able to really capitalise on the success that they've had. They finished on top of the ladder a couple of times as well and just haven't been able to break through for a grand final, for another premiership. It always seems like finals is where they seem to really stumble, whether it's going out in straight sets or just winning the one game. So it's actually a very good point when you consider that they have been rebuilding on the run. But those 5 players that you do mention that are still there since that premiership are very, very good players. And you can really build your team around a real core like that. When you've got that kind of quality there, plus Gary Ablett coming back, you can sort of understand how they have been able to build on the run. Hawthorn's another team that's been able to do it up until this year, where they've bottomed out effectively. So it's actually, a very interesting point that you do make. I've been really critical of Geelong over the last probably 12 months. I wrote them off very early in the season, despite the fact that they were playing some great football and beating some really good teams purely because of their finals record. But the way that they absolutely demolished Collingwood on the weekend, credit where credit's due. They've been fantastic and they've drafted well as well, Pete. You've got to keep in mind they've gotten the likes of Gary Rowan, Luke Dalhouse, who are premiership players in their own rights to their club. So they've been very clever in the way that they've been able to rebuild. But you've got to keep in mind also that they've been a successful team, and success really does attract those top-ranked players. They're already talking about potentially getting Jeremy Cameron to the team, which would be a huge coup for Geelong, particularly with Tom Hawkins coming towards the end of his career despite being in career best form. So success breeds success, and I think that that's how you have to look at Geelong. But it's going to be really interesting to see how they go this weekend. Really looking forward to that game.
Yeah, it's going to be a cracker. I think one of the big talking points is whether Patrick Dangerfield will play up forward after kicking 4 against Collingwood last week. Of course, we know he's so dangerous through the midfield as well. It's the Dustin Martin conundrum. Not a bad position to be in if you're Chris Scott. Our second story this morning, we turn to rugby union. A story from Sammy Phillips in the Sydney Morning Herald, and he's looking at the Wallabies and the challenge ahead of them, I guess, this week as they head to Eden Park in Auckland, where the Wallabies haven't won since 1986, on the back of last week's 16-all draw with the All Blacks in Wellington. Extremely difficult challenge going to Eden Park, where the hoodoo remains firmly in place. And I think off the top of my head, the last 5 Wallabies matches there, they've lost each of them by at least 20, possibly even 25 points. Last season, we saw a historic 47-26 victory for the Wallabies in Perth to kickstart the Bledisloe Cup campaign. That was followed by a 57-point turnaround just 7 days later at Eden Park when they were kept scoreless and went down 36 points to 0. Wallabies fans have been down this path before, as Semi Phillips tells us. The high that comes with upsetting the All Blacks, and even in this instance, if that upset was only a draw, it leads to great optimism, overexcited commentary, and potentially a false sense of security, and it's most often followed by a crashing low of an Eden Park thumping. What do you think, Nat? Should we be preparing or I guess, holding back on our expectations ahead of what is a huge challenge in Auckland, or has this team turned a corner, and do you think we go into the match with an opportunity to try and go one better and get the win on Sunday afternoon?
Pete, I want to say that we've turned the corner. They were absolutely fantastic on the weekend in that match. Of course, didn't quite get the win, but they really gave people a lot of hope. It looks like the future is really bright for the Wallabies. That said, I am cautious. I was at Eden Park last year. It was my first ever Eden Park experience. We went over there with so much optimism. It was a last-minute decision to even book the flights. I think we didn't even book to go over to New Zealand until Monday because we were just expecting the Wallabies to crash out after that first Bledisloe. We got there. New Zealanders were all they were very pessimistic about their side, about their chances, saying that this was the first time the Wallabies were going to win the Bledisloe in, nearly 2 decades, over 2 decades. And then, of course, we got the All Black side that we've seen so often, that crushing defeat in torrential rain in Auckland. So I'm a little bit hesitant to say it's going to be different this time, but if you're going on that first match, the signs were really good and really, really promising to see, some of those young guys come through, some of the new combinations that we've seen. James O'Connor was brilliant in the number 10, so that was certainly a shining light for the Wallabies as well. So hoping that it's going to be a really good contest, whether or not they can break that hoodoo, which goes back to 1986, is going to be a very tough ask for them though.
It's going to be a very tough ask. I think to your point, there is some young blood, some fresh talent who don't necessarily have the monkey on the back in regards to a history of losing to the All Blacks. Guys like Harry Wilson, who played for the Junior Wallabies last year and beat New Zealand convincingly. He won't look up necessarily, or he certainly doesn't play as if he looks up, sees the black jersey and is instantly intimidated. Scrum half Nick White had a couple of comments to say along those themes. He said, the group has only come together. We're pretty fresh. It's been 3 weeks. There's a lot of belief in the things we're doing that they'll work. We also have a lot of areas we've seen we can really fix the detail in the way we want to play the game. If we can look at areas they're going to come at us and then we're not going to go out onto the field blind and be taken by surprise, that's something that we're going to do and something that we expect to help our preparation. So it's going to be a fascinating match on Sunday afternoon. It's great watching Sunday Arvo footy. There's not many better ways to finish the weekend. And a nice challenge for Dave Rennie is deciding whether the now fit and available Jordan Patea comes into his starting lineup or 23, or whether he retains the players who were so close to that breakthrough win in Wellington. We turn to our third story this morning. It comes from Peter Lawler in The Australian, looking at the Australian cricket team and the sudden rise of all-rounder options coming through the first round of the Sheffield Shield. Mitch Marsh probably went into this season as Australia's most likely first choice all-rounder in the Test team. He took 7 wickets in his final Ashes Test last year. He's been batting pretty well and contributing also in the shorter forms of the game. However, he injured his ankle and had to return after the first match in the IPL, so hasn't been able to play in the Sheffield Shield thus far. He also, of course, hurt himself by punching a wall last year after a dismissal in the Sheffield Shield and missed out on some cricket on the back of that as well. In the meanwhile, Cameron Green, his West Australian teammate, 21-year-old precocious talent, averaged over 60 in the Shield last year. He's come along and shown that he's got all the skills in his arsenal to potentially be a long-term player for Australia. Ashton Agar, another West Australian, he took a 5 for and made a century in the first round of Sheffield Shield matches this weekend. And so did Michael Nessa, the Queenslander, who's been traditionally known, I think, as an excellent bowler who can bat a little bit, but he broke through for his maiden century. He's been 12th man for Australia 10 times over the last 2 years, so hasn't been far away from breaking through for his Test debut as well. It's the third coach we're talking about who's got some nice problems here in Justin Langer. How important, Nat, do you think it is to have an all-rounder in the Australian Test team? And if you do think that you need one in there, who would you be selecting for the first match against India?
It really is the Andrew Flintoff effect, isn't it, with the Australian cricket team? We were just so tormented by that 2005 Ashes campaign where Flintoff basically starred for England, that ever since then we've always felt that there needs to be some sort of all-rounder in that side. We probably will go into this series against India with an all-rounder, not just because of that mentality, but probably because they just like to have the flexibility of having someone who can, just bat a little bit deeper and then also have an extra bowling option. I think personally, Mitch Marsh probably needs to get the nod if he's fit, if he's playing okay. He is the incumbent. He probably needs to get the nod. But if it wasn't for Mitch Marsh, I would love to see Michael Nessa get a go. He's been there, been close so many times. And it would be great to see him, take on India. I don't think they will go down that path, though. I think they want to see someone with a little bit more runs on the board, pardon the pun, when it comes to batting, just because India can bat quite deep. So I think that that's probably something that selectors will be looking at when they do decide on who will be their 11, who will be their 12-man squad. But it would be great to see Michael Nessa really get his baggy green.
When it comes to Cameron Green, do you think patience is the order of the day here for someone who is so talented but already spent most of the last year's Sheffield Shield not bowling due to some injuries and some issues with his back? In terms of load management, should he be considered perhaps purely as a specialist batsman if he is to be picked, or perhaps we just let him keep building and honing his craft both with bat and with ball?
I think, look, Cameron Green's going to get his opportunity. There's no doubt that it's going to happen in the next couple of years. He needs to be in the squad so that he can really understand what it takes to be a national player. I think he'll be selected in the larger squad. Whether or not he does get into that 11 is still to be seen. I think you just need to wait a little bit. We talk about players that do have injuries because of bowling actions. Pat Cummins is a perfect example of someone who maybe we rushed a little bit too quickly and then had a series of injuries with his back. He's gotten that right now that he's a little bit older, is a bit more mature, and he's really honed his craft. So I'd like to see Cameron Green maybe just wait off just a little bit, but there's no doubt he's going to get his opportunity and he's going to be an Australian Test player at some stage.
We turn to rugby league now, and someone else who's going to get their opportunity by the sounds of things, according to New South Wales State of Origin coach Brad Fittler, is a guy who made his Origin debut last year and would be the first to admit it didn't go the way he planned, and that's South Sydney Rabbitohs number 6, Cody Walker. The live wire played just the one match last year. He was taken off pretty early for a playmaker in that match by Fittler. Queensland won, and Walker wasn't selected for the remainder of the series. However, speaking with the Sydney Morning Herald's Andrew Webster, Fittler suggesting that Cody Walker has been the best player in the competition for the last month. And when asked whether Walker can secure that number 6 jumper ahead of Luke Keary, who'd been considered the most likely, for most of the year, Fittler said absolutely he can. He's done that good this year. A little bit of rugby league chat there with the done that good, but I don't mind it because Brad Fittler's a pretty relaxed kind of bloke. Keary's likely to be involved as well, and of course Nathan Cleary seems to have the number 7 jersey sewn up. Fittler saying between the three of them, they will make up the halves. It's just a matter of working the order out. It's hard to know how to deal with all 3 games in 3 weeks. Do you play the same 17? The one thing we've got is good depth. There are a few alternatives there. Do you think Brad Fittler's right, Nat? Do you think he should select on form? And if he is doing so, really it is Cody Walker who gets first opportunity in that 6 jersey? Or should he take into account the disappointing performance from Walker on that stage last year and perhaps give Luke Keary that long-awaited opportunity?
I think that you've got to probably pick On form, but you have to keep in mind that previous series as well. That's certainly going to be something that will be playing on Brad Fittler's mind, but you can guarantee that he would be putting that down to Cody Walker as a challenge to really redeem himself. So that's something that he's probably going to discuss with his player. Cody Walker's been in such fantastic form. It's almost impossible to ignore it the way that he has gone. If he finishes the season strongly, I think that he certainly needs to be given the opportunity for that first game. As long as you've already got Keary in that squad as well, you can always swap and change. If it doesn't work out, then you can always just change it for the second match. Of course, Keary's got a couple of injury concerns as well, suffered another concussion, so there's also that hanging over his head. I think that Brad Fittler will probably pick On form, and I think he should pick On form as long as you do have that safety net there with Keary just waiting in the wings. Of course, it's such a talented New South Wales squad anyway. I think that regardless of who you pick, they're probably going to get the wood over Queensland in this Origin series. But of course, like you mentioned, it's a great headache for Brad Fittler to have, like a couple of coaches that we've already mentioned today, having so much depth and so much talent to pick from. And when you compare that to Queensland, who have a couple of outright stars who would pretty much be walk up choices for that side, it really does put New South Wales in a very strong position coming into Origin.
Yeah, and to the point of Cody Walker, he may not have played his best in State of Origin last year, but he's doing it on the big stage now. He's doing it when it matters. With finals matches, which have been make or break for the Rabbitohs already in the first 2 weeks. And he has shown an ability to step up in that stage. We know that State of Origin does funny things to footballers. It brings the absolute best out of some. And you look at guys like a Darius Boyd or a Michael Jennings, who for years could put average or not great form at NRL level behind them and constantly deliver on that stage. I think Michael Jennings had at least 1 year where he was being selected from NRL reserve grade to play at State of Origin level. But it's a great problem for Fittler to have, and I think we will see Luke Keary heavily involved as well. But if you'd said 12 months ago that Cody Walker would be wearing the 6th jersey for State of Origin, not many people would have thought that would happen. So it's a credit to him and to his coach, Wayne Bennett, at the Rabbitohs, who, of course, will be his opposing coach come Origin time, that he's got him in that career best form. Our final story this morning, it's not quite the race that stops the nation, but it is, in theory, the race that stops the nation's biggest city, and that's the Everest, the $15 million race created by Racing New South Wales, which heads into its 4th edition this coming weekend. It's a race that sees 12 of the world's biggest and best sprinters all in action, trying to secure that huge sum of money. It's been contentious in recent years in regards to the fact that Racing New South Wales and Peter V'landys, the Racing New South Wales CEO, have I guess, put excitement and what they want to do ahead of tradition and haven't been concerned about running it on the same day as the Caulfield Cup, that much storied race in Melbourne, which has so much wonderful tradition behind it. The Everest, coming in on the same day, and V'landys and his team being so bullish about wanting to attract the best jockeys and the best horses, not just for that race, but for the entirety of the card at Randwick. We saw the barrier draw last night. Classique Legend retained his $4.50 favouritism after drawing barrier 6. He'll have Nature Strip on one side of him and Gitra on the other. So probably the 3 most fancied horses in the race will jump from 5, 6 and 7. It's a fantastic race on paper. There's some wonderful horses in action. But I want to know, down in Melbourne, Nat, because I've obviously spent a few years recently in Sydney and seen the hype around it in that city. Down in Melbourne, what's interest like ahead of the Everest? Is Victorian loyalty seeing focus remaining on the Caulfield Cup, or is there genuine hype around the sprint in Sydney?
Look, Pete, there's no doubt that in racing circles there's plenty of interest around the Everest. It's one of the richest races going around. So there's going to be a lot of interest, particularly within racing circles. But to be perfectly honest, up until this week, I didn't even realise that it was on. We've got footy finals happening down here, and you know that Melbourne is such an AFL-centric town that's basically the one thing that we're talking about, that and trades. So AFL is still really dominating the headlines down here. A little bit of horse racing for the Caulfield Cup, but not a lot of interest in the Everest. From a local perspective anyway. Like I said, of course, you've got your hardcore punters and your horse racing fans that will certainly be interested in what is happening up in Sydney. But as far as your everyday Melburnian goes, I would say that most people wouldn't know that the race was on. I've also lived in Sydney, so I know exactly the hype around the Everest and how excited everybody does get. Of course, they can have a few fans up there as well at the races. So that's certainly something that would be really feeding into the interest around that race. But as far as newspaper interest, television interest goes in a sporting sense down here, it's all AFL centric. There's not a lot of talk about the Caulfield Cup really, regardless. The Everest definitely, but not even that much about the Caulfield Cup. It's all the AFL and the preliminary finals this weekend.
Yeah, Peter Volandes, an interesting comment here. The Racing New South Wales boss, when asked where the barrier draw could be next year after previously having it on the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House, he said maybe we'll have to do it on the smelly Yarra River next year. A bit of a crack at Victoria. But look, I think Volandes is doing a great job trying to build hype around what is an excellent addition to the Australian racing calendar. The reality is that this year, with AFL and NRL finals going so deep into the year, having to share the spotlight with those sports is absolutely impacting the hype and the ability for both those races really to break into mainstream sports news and dominate the back pages as they perhaps might have in a standard year. It'll be fascinating to see as we head into the Cox Plate next week and the coverage of that leading into the AFL's first ever evening or twilight grand final. It'll be interesting to see with the Cox Plate whether that's able to generate a little bit more excitement. Nat, that's all we've got time for today. Fantastic as always to catch up. Great to talk through some cracking stories and hopefully get the opportunity to catch up with you again next week to preview AFL and NRL grand finals and hopefully to review a Wallabies win in Auckland for the first time since 1986. How good would that be?
Yeah, fingers crossed, Pete. Like I said, it was so exciting to watch them on the weekend. So hopefully we can finally break that hoodoo. I'll certainly be watching and you'll be watching too, no doubt.
I will absolutely be watching. Cannot wait. Thank you so much for watching and listening to the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. We'll see you again tomorrow with NRL.com's Brad Walter. Have a great day.